The first ash reeds burned under royal order before Mabel Quill could finish reading the heat bend count tied to their roots. Ember marsh did not burn like forest. It breathed first. The silver reeds leaned before smoke rose, their stems turning by degrees toward heat, hidden under black mud, their roots holding water where fire wanted a road. To nobles on the causeway, the marsh looked like wasted land. Wet acres, black pools, old gates, and farmers too poor to make beauty profitable. To Mabel, it was a map of where flame had not yet reached the surface. That morning, Dragon King Rennick Daw stood while Land Minister Odessa Crane unfolded the reclamation decree. By royal approval, Odessa read, the western reach of Ember Marsh shall be burned, drained, and converted into grain allotments. The ash reeds maintained by widow Mabel Quill are judged obstructive to land development, excessive in water use, and unsupported by fire risk conversion maps. Obstructive. Mabel kept both hands around her reed ledger. 6 years earlier, the same word had been spoken over her husband's body after the first royal harvest flooded. Callum Quill had died with his shoulder braced against the marsh gate wheel, holding the flood channel open while underground fire moved beneath the barley fields. The villages had survived. The harvest had drowned. The official record had never said firebreak. It said, reckless flooding of valuable land. Your Majesty, Mabel said, the marsh is not unused water. It is fire defense. Odessa lowered the decree with practiced patience. The Land Ministry has reviewed the terrain. The soil beneath the reeds is suitable for reclamation if dried and ash treated. The conversion maps show no active surface flame. They had not been asked to count what heat did before it became visible. Surface flame comes last. Rennick did not smile. That made him more dangerous. He looked like a king who had weighed hunger, dragon grain, noble debts, and flight routes, then accepted a map because maps did not speak with a widow's voice. My dragons require grain, he said. So do the villages under this crown. And if you burn the marsh that slows wildfire beneath their fields, they will require graves. Odessa's expression stayed smooth. Mistress Quill has opposed every stage of reclamation. Her attachment to the old flood system is understandable, given her husband's history. But private grief cannot hold royal land hostage. Mabel opened the reed ledger, then read public numbers. Heat bend counts from the western reach. Ash root moisture readings. Ash drift under the North Dragon route. Gatewater marks from the last 3 dry moons. Odessa turned to Rennick. The submitted objections were summarized in the conversion packet. Summarized is not read beside a marsh before the wind changes. Rennick's dark eyes fixed on her. The Land Ministry report says your readings are inconclusive. Inconclusive is not empty. The first torch touched the reeds. Fire ran along the dry tips in a thin silver crackle. Not a blaze yet. Only official removal. Mabel did not move toward it. She knew better than to let them call her frantic. She watched the stems blacken and counted the lean of those not yet touched. Northwest, then east, then stillness. Wrong. She looked toward the east ridge beyond the approved conversion line. Rennick followed her gaze. What did you see? Not what I expected. Odessa folded the decree. Ash reeds bend in wind when burned. That is not a royal survey. Ash reeds bend toward concentrated underground heat before open flame reaches the surface, Mabel said. Not names, not guilt. Heat, pressure, dry channels. Enough to tell whether a map has missed a fire path. Rennick held out one hand. Give the ledger to the surveyor. He did not apologize for the torch. He did not halt the project. But he opened a procedure before the second reed line could be burned. Mabel placed the ledger into the surveyor's hands. Western reach. 3 weeks of early bending before dawn. The reeds have not been leaning toward the old harvest fields. They have been leaning toward a heat path under the east ridge. Odessa glanced toward the ridge only once. Ministerial lease land sits beyond the conversion boundary. It is not part of this burn. No one said it was. The answer held because it did not overreach. The surveyor read from the ledger. Ash root moisture, falling in the western reach. Ash drift, irregular under the north flight route. Heat bend count, rising eastward after second dawn bell. Gatewater dropped without flood release. Twice. A gate did not lose water by politics, Mabel said. It lost water because pressure had found a lower road. Odessa's voice cooled. Or the widow has failed to maintain the gates, and now blames the ministry. There it was. A dead husband blamed for opening water. A living widow blamed for losing it. Mabel looked at the king, not the minister. Order one heat trench survey before the western reach is burned further. Odessa answered first. A full survey will delay reclamation and unsettle land grants already promised. Then delay promises before they become ash. Rennick looked toward the burning reed edge, then to the nobles waiting for farmland, then to the flight route where dragon shadows crossed the sky. The outer strip burn continues under watch, he said. No deeper cuts until a limited heat rod test is witnessed. A king could pause a cut without admitting the knife had been wrong. Mabel felt no victory. Outer strips were still firebreak. A paused wound was still a wound. The court surveyor drove a bronze heat rod into the mud where the remaining reeds leaned. The test would not ask whether Mabel was loyal. It would ask whether the mud was already burning beneath the map. The rod should have cooled in wet soil. Instead, the red wax ring around its handle softened. The ash reeds nearest the test site bent first. Then, a second strip answered farther east, narrow and measured, the way heat moved under mud. Toward the lease boundary beyond the burn map, boundary was not guilt. It was only where the map stopped answering. The reeds had not accused the minister. They had not cleared Mabel. They had only shown that concentrated heat lay beyond the conversion line, where the land ministry map had marked safe ground. And the second torch moved along the outer strip, where firebreak still counted as sacrifice. The next test would not ask whose land lay above the heat. It would ask who had stopped the royal map before the heat path ended. The heat trench survey did not prove Odessa Crane had hidden fire beneath the ridge. It only showed the royal conversion map had stopped measuring before the heat path ended. Rennick Door did not cancel the burn. That mattered more than the nobles wished to hear, and less than Mabel needed. The outer strip still crackled under watch while marsh workers beat sparks from the wetter channels. A king could order a test and still let damage continue. Extend the heat. Trench line to the conversion boundary, Rennick said. Odessa inclined her head. The approved survey ends at the western reclamation limit, Your Majesty. Beyond that is lease review ground, not burn ground. Then we are not surveying ownership, we are following heat. The court surveyor marked a chord from the softened heat rod toward the east ridge. Every 10 paces, an assistant drove a bronze probe into the mud and sealed the handle with red wax. The first 2 rings softened. The third held. The fourth softened again, lower and slower, as if heat had found a narrow road beneath wet ground. Irregular trench heat, the surveyor said. Not surface flame, not yet. Right, not yet, Mabel said. Odessa's voice stayed calm. Irregular heat can occur under drying marshland during reclamation. Yes, Mabel said. That is why we compare it to gatewater. The gatewater log was brought from the old marsh house. Mabel had written half those entries herself. The rest belonged to marsh keepers before her, including Callum's last hand on the night he died. She did not ask to read it. Grief could make a true number sound like pleading. Rennick gave the log to the surveyor. Dates. The surveyor opened to the last 3 dry moons. First drop, 9th day, second dawn bell. East sluice fell 2 finger widths without recorded release. Second drop, 17th day, before moonset. North gatewater fell 1 palm width. No flood command, no storm drain, no repair opening. Who received the report? Rennick asked. The surveyor checked the receipt line. Land Ministry District Office. Copy to Royal Conversion Packet requested. District receipt confirmed. Royal Packet summary notes. Marshkeeper reports ordinary seasonal loss. Ordinary seasonal loss. Ordinary was the word officials used when they needed water to stop being evidence. Odessa looked at the log. The district office may have summarized according to prior marsh behavior. That does not establish intent. No, it establishes the royal packet did not carry the full gatewater marks. Rennick's jaw tightened. Conversion boundary map. A wide parchment was unrolled over a causeway stone. Blue marked wetland. Gold marked future grain allotments. A black line marked where the Land Ministry had stopped the fire risk conversion survey. Beyond it lay pale lease ground marked inactive review. Who drew the boundary? Initial line by Land Ministry surveyor Pellon Orst, the surveyor read. Ridge review countersigned by Senior Ridge Clerk Havron. Final conversion packet under Minister Crane's seal. Odessa's answer came evenly. My seal confirms the packet submitted for royal approval. It does not mean I walked every reed bank. A seal could carry a packet without proving the packet had carried everything beneath it. Was the gatewater loss included in full? Rennick asked. No. Summary only. Mabel kept her voice level. Summaries can make a marsh look still after water has already moved. Rennick's eyes came to her. And ash drift? She opened the reed ledger to the North Dragon route. 3 flights reported ash drag against the wind. Not heavy enough to ground dragons. Enough to show smoke being pulled upward from below the usual burn line. Odessa's brow narrowed. Dragon ash drift is affected by wing pressure. Yes. Which is why I logged only drift appearing before flight passage. The surveyor read the entry. Ash drift, observed beneath North Route before dawn patrol. No surface smoke. Reed, lean eastward, same morning. Ridge survey, Rennick ordered. Odessa's eyes shifted toward the east. The ridge survey concerns lease stability, not marsh fire behavior. Read it beside the heat line. The ridge survey was thinner than the conversion map. It listed soil firmness, drainage promise, crop projection, road access, and noble lease suitability. It did not list underground heat, gatewater draw, or ash drift. The surveyor found the signature. Ridge survey signed by Senior Ridge Clerk Havron. Lease boundary under ministerial holding, pending allotment. Pending to whom? Rennick asked. Not named in this copy. Odessa answered smoothly. Several noble applicants remain under review. Ministerial holding prevents speculation before grant. Mabel looked at the blank beneficiary line. Or leaves the beneficiary invisible until the grant is safe. The silence snapped toward her. She lowered her eyes to the ledger. That is a possibility. Not proof. Rennick held her gaze. Noted as possibility. The heat trench cord crossed the black conversion line. The 5th probe softened. The 6th softened faster. Heat path continues beyond approved burn map, the surveyor said. Toward the lease boundary? Rennick asked. Along it. Not enough to name source. Enough to show the map ended before the heat did. Mabel looked toward the old flood channel hidden beneath reed shadow. Callum's gate had opened there 6 years ago. If this heat path touched that same channel, then his flood had cut fire from village roots. But that was not proven. Old flood channel overlay, she said. Odessa's voice cooled. Callum Quill's incident is not before this survey. It is if the same water road touches the heat path. Rennick ordered the overlay. The marsh workers brought a cracked board map from the gatehouse. The old channel line ran through the drowned harvest fields, curved under the western reach, and stopped near the conversion boundary. The surveyor laid it over the heat trench cord. The lines did not match completely. They touched once. One touch was not justice for Callum. It was only enough to make the old flood road relevant again. At the bend where gatewater had dropped, the heat trench survey had not cleared Callum. It had not accused Odessa. It had only shown that the water loss, the reed bend, the ash drift, and the unfinished conversion map all met at the place the royal packet had reduced to seasonal marsh behavior. Behind them, the outer strip fire jumped a narrow, wet cut and caught outer marker reeds. Mabel turned before anyone gave permission. "Stop the outer burn." Rennick looked from the flame to the map. The next order would decide whether he trusted the packet enough to keep burning, while the marsh contradicted it. The next record would have to show who reduced gatewater loss to seasonal behavior before Rennick saw the packet. The jumping outer strip fire did not prove Odessa Crane had lied. It proved Rennick Dorr could no longer test the map while allowing the firebreak to burn. The flame had not become a wall. It had crossed one narrow, wet cut, while marsh workers beat sparks back with soaked mats. Still, Mabel saw the danger in the shape of it. Fire did not need to conquer a marsh all at once. It only needed one permitted strip, one official delay, one king, still willing to call defense a sacrifice. "Stop the outer burn," she said again. Odessa answered before Renwick could. "The outer strip is under control. If your Majesty halts now, the reclamation schedule will collapse before the survey establishes anything beyond irregular heat." Mabel looked at the softened probes and the gatewater log. "It has established enough to keep fire from being used as the test." Rennick looked at the flames, then at the nobles waiting behind the rope, then at the dragon root where ash lifted against the wind. "Emergency burn order," he said. "All active torches down. Outer strip isolated. No new reed cuts, drainage cuts, or ash treatment until the packet route is read under witness." Mabel did not mistake that for belief. He had not restored her. He had not admitted the marsh was right. He had only stopped feeding flame into a record that had begun to fail. Odessa bowed. "Entered under protest for harvest delay and grant disruption." "Entered," Rennick said. The protest mattered. It kept the minister procedural. It kept the order from pretending there had been no dispute. Marsh workers dragged soaked barriers along the burn edge. The ash reeds beyond the cut leaned in narrow strips, measurable and unspectacular. Rennick turned back to the gatewater log. Receipt chain. A district packet was brought from the land ministry chest. It held Mabel's original gatewater reports, 2 district receipts, and the royal packet summary that had reduced both drops to ordinary seasonal loss. The surveyor read the first receipt. "Gatewater report received at Ember District Land Office. Receiving clerk, Tolan Mere. Date, 9th day, 3rd bell." "Second drop?" Rennick asked. "Received 17th day, dawn receipt. Assistant clerk Beranol. Who wrote ordinary seasonal loss?" The surveyor turned to the summary sheet. "District reduction note by summary clerk Ivan Rake. Language: seasonal marsh loss consistent with prior dry moon pattern. Full log retained in district file. Royal packet to receive reduced water note unless fire activity confirmed. Unless fire activity confirmed. Surface flame comes last." That sentence had made water wait for flame before becoming evidence. Odessa studied the chain. "A district summary clerk may reduce repeated local reports when no visible burn is confirmed. That is ordinary packet discipline." Ordinary was the word officials used when they needed water to stop being evidence, Mabel said. Rennick's gaze came to her, sharp enough to remind the court he had not changed sides. "You will speak as witness, not accuser. I am speaking as the person whose numbers were made smaller before they reached you. Then keep the numbers precise." Precision was the one dignity they had not yet taken. The conversion boundary map came next. The surveyor tapped the black line. Pellen Orst drew the initial boundary from the Dry Acre Valuation Survey, not the Heat Risk Survey. Mabel looked up. "Which survey did the Royal Packet cite?" "The Royal Packet cites Fire Risk Conversion Map, but the boundary came from Dry Acre Valuation." "Yes." Odessa's posture remained calm. "Dry Acre Valuation is a lawful basis for reclamation limits. Fire Risk Review may be attached after valuation." "Was it attached before Rennick approved the burn?" Mabel asked. No full heat risk attachment in the royal copy, the surveyor said. Only safety summary. The burn had been approved from a boundary taught by value, then dressed in safety language. A king could sign a map and never see which map had taught the line where to stop. Haverin's Ridge Review, Rennick said. The ridge packet was thinner still. Senior Ridge Clerk Haverin had countersigned soil firmness, drainage promise, crop projection, road access and lease stability. No gatewater log appeared. No ash drift. No heat bend count. The surveyor found only one notation. Fire. Risk outside active review zone. Outside active review zone, Mabel repeated, because the boundary stopped before the heat did. Odessa lifted one hand. Because the ridge was not in the burn zone. No, Mabel said. It was in the heat path. The distinction held the causeway silent. Ministerial seal scope, Rennick said. Odessa answered herself. My seal confirms the final packet was complete for royal land approval according to materials advanced by district and survey offices. It does not certify that every retained local log was copied upward in full. A seal could make an omission lawful without making it safe. Lease beneficiary, Rennick said. Ministerial holding pending allotment under pre-grant quiet rule, the surveyor read. Beneficiary names may be withheld until drainage completes to prevent speculation. A quiet rule could protect the crown from speculation and still blind it to interest. Pending did not name a beneficiary, Mabel said. That is the rule, Odessa replied, or leaves the benefit unnamed until the ground is already changed. Rennick lifted one hand. Possibility, not proof. Mabel accepted it because it was true. The old flood channel overlay lay across the map, one touch at the bend where gatewater had dropped. Rennick looked at it longer than before. Gatehouse logs, Odessa said. Callum Quill's flooding record remains a separate incident. It remains separate, Rennick said, but the old channel is now relevant. Bring the gatehouse logs. Do not open the judgment record. The old death would not be retried today. Only the road beneath it would be read. The emergency order was written before any new torch could move. Outer burn halted. Firebreak isolated. Ash reeds beyond the test strip protected under temporary royal watch. Mabel Quill entered as technical witness for heat bend, gatewater, and ash drift readings, not restored to marsh authority. Not restored. The words landed cleanly. The packet route had not cleared her. It had not accused Odessa. It had only shown that gatewater loss became seasonal behavior, dry acre valuation became fire risk boundary, and lease land remained unnamed while heat traveled past the map. At the bottom of the district reduction note, the surveyor found one more reference line. Full gatewater loss held at district file pending Ridgely stabilization. Rennick read it twice. The next file would not ask who profited yet. It would ask who decided water could wait until after the lease was stable. The Ridge lease stabilization file did not prove Odessa Crane had buried Mabel's warning. It only showed the gatewater loss had been held below the royal packet until the lease ground could be made safe for grant. The file arrived from the Land Ministry chest in a green wax sleeve, not the black seal of accusation. Mabel watched it placed beside the damp gatewater log and the cracked flood channel overlay. The outer burn had stopped, but smoke still crawled low over the cut reeds, a reminder that a firebreak could be paused and still be wounded. Rennick Dorr did not invite Mabel to the table. He ordered a stool set 3 paces behind the surveyor and entered her name again as technical witness. Not authority, not trust, only record access. Odessa Crane noted the placement with a small nod, as if procedure had put the widow exactly where she belonged. Read the stabilization file, Renwick said. The surveyor broke the green wax. Ridgely stabilization, East Boundary Review. Purpose: preserve grant suitability during drainage preparation. Instruction: retain local irregularities at district file until lease ground confirms stable for allotment. Local irregularities, Mabel said. Rennick's gaze came to her, warning and listening at once. She kept her voice flat. Gatewater loss was not local if the heat path crossed the conversion line, Odessa replied. The file does not say gatewater was ignored. It says irregularities were retained pending stabilization. A packet cannot carry every marsh complaint before a grant has even formed. No, Mabel said. But it carried the burn order. The silence tightened. Who requested retention? Rennick asked. The surveyor followed the margin chain. Retention request, initiated by Senior Ridge Clerk Havron. District reduction completed by Summary Clerk Ivan Rake under Ordinary Report Authority. Holding note countersigned by Lease Stabilization Desk. Pre-grant quiet rule invoked. Does Ivan Rake have authority to reduce a report? Rennick asked. Yes, Odessa said before the surveyor checked. District summary clerks reduce local condition reports for royal packets when no active hazard is certified, the surveyor confirmed. Authority exists, unless fire activity confirmed, Mabel said. Is that rule? Or added language? The surveyor searched the back page. Standard rule says visible hazard confirmed. This file says fire activity confirmed. Difference? Rennick asked. A visible hazard can include smoke, heat marks, water draw, structural risk, Mabel said. Fire activity waits for flame. Odessa's eyes cooled. That is interpretation. It is hydrology, Mabel said. And timing. Rennick did not defend her. Enter both. The surveyor wrote, Distinction disputed. That was not victory. It was only a place where truth had not been flattened. Havron's receipt, Rennick said. The Ridge Review packet opened to a list of attachments. Dryacre valuation received. Lease road survey received. Drainage promise received. Full gatewater log not received. Reduced water note received. So Havron did not review the full log? Rennick asked. Not by this attachment list, Odessa said. Ridge Review would not require full marsh logs if the boundary had already placed fire risk outside active review. The boundary came from Dryacre valuation, Mabel said. Pellen Orst's source. Rennick ordered. Another parchment was opened. Pellen's draft boundary had been copied from the Dryacre valuation survey because the heat risk survey was listed as pending field reconciliation. Pending, Rennick said. The word moved through the causeway like a small blade. Mabel looked toward the protected reeds. The burn was not pending. Odessa's posture remained correct. Reclamation often proceeds with attached safety reviews ongoing, provided no active hazard is certified. And the active hazard was waiting for flame before it could certify itself, Mabel said. Rennick turned the next page. Pre-grant quiet rule. Who invoked it? Lease Stabilization Desk, the surveyor read. Approved under ministerial procedure. Beneficiary names sealed until drainage completion to prevent speculation and coercive purchase. Is that unusual? No, Odessa said. It is standard for contested noble allotments. The surveyor hesitated. Standard, yes. But this file adds, beneficiary line to remain sealed until gatewater irregularities resolved by stabilization. Not until reviewed? Mabel asked. Resolved by stabilization? No one answered quickly. Rennick's face did not change. Enter that line. The lease beneficiary remained sealed. No name appeared. No estate was accused, yet the file had shown a rule meant to prevent speculation being used while the ground itself was still refusing the map. Odessa turned to the king. Mistress Quill's presence may compromise interpretation of documents tied to her husband's prior flooding record. I request that she remain technical witness only, barred from commenting on lease language. Mabel felt the old door closing. Rennick looked at her, then at the reed ledger, then at the smoke beyond the causeway. Denied. She remains technical witness for heat, water, and route relevance. She will not testify to motive. It was not protection. It was boundary. For once, boundary helped. Gatehouse logs, Rennick said. Route relevance only. Judgment record remains closed. The old logs came wrapped in oilskin, their pages swollen and smelling of mud. Mabel did not touch them. The surveyor opened to the night Callum died. West Floodgate opened during harvest fire. Gate wheel held under manual pressure. Water road released through Old Channel 3. Flood reached Royal Barley before dawn. Villages east of the lower ridge remained dry. Heat notation? Rennick asked. The surveyor traced a burned corner. Underground heat suspected at Barley route line. No trench confirmation. Gatekeeper note incomplete. Callum's note. Mabel could see his handwriting on the edge, broken where water had blurred the ink. The surveyor read what remained. If closed, heat runs under Ridge Road. Open until village side cools. The words did not clear him. They did not prove the court had lied. They only showed he had been writing fire behavior while the judgment later called him reckless. Odessa spoke softly. An incomplete note taken during emergency cannot overturn a flooding judgment. No, Mabel said. It can only explain why the old road matters. At the bottom of the gatehouse page, a later clerk had added one reference line. Flood judgment forwarded to land recovery valuation. Rennick looked from that line to the lease stabilization file. The ridge file had not named a beneficiary. The gatehouse log had not reopened Callum's judgment. Together, they showed that the same office language had once priced flooded land and now held back water warnings until land could be safely granted. The next record would have to show how damaged harvest land became valuable lease ground. The land recovery valuation did not prove Odessa Crane had profited from Callum Quill's flood. It only showed that land ruined under his name had later become valuable enough to hide behind a lease rule. The valuation packet was heavier than the ridge file. That alone troubled Mabel. A court could call a man reckless in one thin judgment and then spend years weighing the land his so-called recklessness had changed. The oilskin bundle was laid on the causeway table beside the gatehouse log, the ridge stabilization file, and the conversion map whose clean black line had stopped before the heat path did. Rennick Dorr did not open Callum's judgment record. He did not restore Mabel's marsh authority. He did not say her husband had been wronged. He only ordered the valuation read under witness, because the last line in the gatehouse log had sent the old flood toward land recovery, not fire review. Route only, he said. No judgment correction today. Mabel stood 3 paces behind the surveyor and accepted the limit because limits kept the record alive. The surveyor broke the valuation seal. Royal Harvest Flood, Western Barley Tract. Initial loss, severe. Crop value destroyed. Soil status after flood, unstable, waterlogged, unsuitable for immediate noble yield. A nobleman behind the rope muttered that everyone knew that. Mabel did not turn. Everyone knew the harvest had drowned. Fewer had cared why villages had not burned. Continue, Rennick said. Second, year inspection. Soil mineral return improved after ash settlement. Third, year inspection. Lower marsh silt increased fertility. Fifth year recommendation. Land may be converted to high-value grain if drainage stabilized and reed intrusion controlled. Reed intrusion. Mabel felt the phrase like mud closing over a boot. The ash reeds had held wet edges around fields that wanted to become fire roads. The valuation called them intrusion because profit needed the marsh to become trespass. Odessa Crane folded her gloved hands. Flooded land can recover into agricultural value. That is not suspicious. No, Mabel said, but the same record should carry why it flooded. It carried the judgment. It carried blame, not heat. Rennick's gaze came to her, hard enough to remind the court that she still stood as witness, not counsel. Numbers. She gave them. If the old channel was opened long enough to drown barley before dawn, then the water road had pressure behind it. The gatehouse note says heat under Ridge Road. The valuation should have sent that note to fire review before calling the reeds intrusion. The surveyor checked the attachment list. No fire review attached. Flood judgment attached. Land recovery recommendation attached. Village survival record not attached. Mabel closed her fingers once at her side. Village survival record. The names of 300 people who had not burned because water had gone where Callum held it. Not attached. Rennick's face changed by almost nothing. Was a village survival record filed? The marsh clerk answered from the workers' line. Yes, Your Majesty. Lower Ridge, Fenmere, and Ashlow all filed no-burn survival rolls after the harvest fire. Where routed, the surveyor found the entry in a side index. Filed under relief. Thanks. Not valuation. Relief thanks. A village could live and still fail to become evidence. Odessa's voice remained procedural. A survival roll records absence of loss. Valuation records damaged land. They are different offices. Different offices can make one story disappear into two harmless halves, Mabel said. Rennick did not silence her. He did not agree either. Enter the office split. The clerk wrote quickly. The next sheet carried farmer compensation offers. Families whose low fields had flooded after Callum opened the gate were offered reduced buyouts under emergency land recovery. Some had accepted within a season. Some had refused until tax pressure made refusal impossible. The buyer line was not a noble name. It was Royal Stabilization Holding, beneficiary still unnamed, Rennick said. Correct, the surveyor answered. Land held pending drainage and grant, Odessa said. That process prevents predatory noble purchase after disaster, or delays the name until the farmers are already gone, Mabel said. Renwick looked at her. She held the line herself. Possibility, not proof. Entered as possibility, he said. The valuation map was placed over Pelenorst's dry acre boundary. The match was not exact. That mattered. If it had matched too perfectly, the court would have found accusation easier than truth. Instead, the recovery valuation had taught the later boundary where the land might become profitable, and Pellen's line had stopped just before the heat risk questions grew inconvenient. The surveyor read the margin. Boundary draft references recovered barley tract, stabilized drainage plan, and lease quiet pending final grant. Heat trench data? Rennick asked. None attached. Gatewater loss? None attached. Ash drift? None. Mabel looked at the outer reeds, blackened at the edge, silver beyond. The land had been valued by what it could grow, not by what it had stopped burning. Odessa's face remained composed. A land ministry values land. A fire defense record values what never caught. The words moved through the marsh workers behind her. Not loudly. They were too practiced at being unheard. But Rennick heard the shift. He turned to the surveyor. Temporary status. The man hesitated. Current West Reach remains under royal reclamation approval, paused by emergency burn order. Change it, Mabel said before she could stop herself. Odessa seized the opening. Mistress Quill exceeds technical witness. She does, Rennick said. The agreement struck clean. Mabel lowered her eyes. Not in shame, but to keep from giving grief the floor. Then Rennick continued, but the question is valid. What status protects evidence without restoring authority or cancelling grant review? The surveyor searched the land code. Temporary firebreak hold. It preserves hydrology, reed beds, gate function, and heat survey access, while ownership and use remain under review. Apply it to the tested reach, Rennick said. Not the entire marsh, the tested reach. Mabel accepted the narrowness. A narrow shield still stopped a blade where it stood. Odessa bowed. Entered under protest for loss of reclamation value. The valuation packet had not cleared Callum. It had not named a hidden beneficiary. It had not proved corruption. It had only shown that the flood blamed on him became, over time, the foundation of a profitable grant, while the survival it bought stayed in another office. At the bottom of the fifth-year valuation, beneath the drainage recommendation, the surveyor found a folded permit request. Controlled warming trial for ridge drainage trench. Mabel felt the marsh go silent around her. The next record would not ask who owned the land. It would ask why anyone had requested heat beneath soil already tied to a buried fire path. The controlled warming permit did not prove anyone had set fire beneath Ember Marsh. It only showed someone had asked to heat a ridge trench where the marsh records had already marked buried pressure. The folded request looked harmless at first glance. That was what made it dangerous. It carried no black seal, no emergency warning, no confession written in a careless hand. It was a work permit, the kind of document court officers signed by the dozen when land needed drying, roads needed firming, and nobles wanted water trained to behave. Rennick Dorr laid it beside the valuation packet without touching the edge of the burned reed map. Read the purpose. The surveyor smoothed the fold. Controlled warming trial for ridge drainage trench. Purpose. Test whether low heat will stabilize damp subsoil before full drainage cut. Location. East Boundary Review Ground, adjacent to Western Reclamation Reach. Mabel felt every marsh worker behind her go still. Odessa Crane did not. Controlled warming is a standard agricultural preparation method in wet districts. It is not a fire order. No, Mabel said. It is a heat request placed beside a firebreak. Rennick's eyes moved to her. Technical witness. She accepted the warning. Heat request placed beside a documented heat path. The surveyor wrote the correction. Who requested it? Rennick asked. Ridge Drainage Works, through Lease Stabilization Desk. Field sponsor, Master Dane Rusk, drainage contractor. Safety reference, no active surface flame on conversion maps. Water risk, seasonal marsh loss. Fire risk, outside active review zone. The phrases fitted too neatly together. No active surface flame. Seasonal marsh loss. Outside active review zone. Each had already been shown smaller than the ground beneath it. Mabel kept her voice measured. The permit used the reduced packet language. The surveyor checked the reference margin. Yes, it cites the Royal Conversion Safety Summary, not the full gatewater log. Rennick did not look away from the page. Ministerial seal. Permit advanced under Lease Stabilization Desk Authority. Ministerial office receipt present. No personal approval line from Minister Crane. Odessa's expression remained level. Large offices receive work permits by procedure. Receipt is not command. A receipt is not innocence either. One marsh worker muttered. Mabel did not turn. She would not let anger become the reason her people were dismissed. Rennick's voice cut coldly across the causeway. No unsworn comments from the worker line. The worker bowed. Chastened. Mabel hated him for it for one breath, then hated that he was right. Loose anger could ruin a tight record. Safety conditions, Rennick said. The surveyor read on. Warming to be performed in shallow stages. No open flame above ground. Heat stones to be buried along trench guide. Test duration. 1 night. Required conditions. No confirmed fire activity. No active flood release. No inhabited structure within hazard radius. No active flood release, Mabel repeated. Odessa said, that prevents steam rupture. It also prevents the marsh from answering heat with water. Renwick looked up. Mabel pointed to the old channel overlay but did not touch it. If heat stones were set near a road that already draws gatewater, and the floodgates were kept closed by permit condition, pressure would look like ordinary loss until the mud dried enough to burn. The surveyor stopped writing. Is that proof? Rennick asked. No. It is why the trench must be opened before anyone calls it drainage. Odessa's mouth tightened faintly. Opening a lease trench before beneficiary grant may violate the pre-grant quiet rule. Then the rule can wait for the fire, Mabel said. Rennick did not echo her. Legal exception? The surveyor consulted the land code. Hazard verification cut. Narrow trench may be opened under royal watch if work permit intersects active emergency firebreak hold. Open 1, Rennick said, at the nearest permit mark. No wider. A narrow cut. Not justice, not trust, but enough for the mud to speak in its own language. Marsh workers took spades to the ridgeside edge under soldier watch. Mabel stood 3 paces back, technical witness only, while the first black clods lifted. Wet peat should have smelled sour and cold. This soil smelled warm, not burning. Not yet. Warm the way a banked coal hid under ash. The first buried heatstone came up cracked. The second came up glazed on one side. The third carried a dark smear that slicked the surveyor's glove. "Pitch?" he asked. Mabel leaned closer. "Do not name it yet. Test whether it floats." A bowl of gatewater was brought. The smear lifted from the glove in a thin black film across the water. Several nobles stepped back. Odessa's voice sharpened for the first time. "Marshes produce black seep. It is common in buried peat." "Yes," Mabel said. "That is why we record where it appears." The surveyor checked the permit sketch against the trench. Black film at first cut, heat stone fracture, ash root moisture low. Trench guide follows east boundary line. "Does it follow drainage slope?" Rennick asked. The surveyor took longer with that answer. "No. The drainage slope falls south. This trench guide runs east." Silence spread. Mabel felt it touch the burned reeds, the gatehouse logs, the old flood road, and the Ridgely's file, not joining them into accusation, only making it impossible to separate them again. Odessa recovered first. A boundary trench may run before it turns. Without the full works plan, slope cannot be judged. "Then bring the full works plan," Rennick said. "Lease works plans may be sealed until beneficiary confirmation." Rennick's face hardened. "The beneficiary remains sealed, the hazard plan does not." The order changed something. Not between him and Mabel. Between the Crown and the paper that had learned to hide behind land. The controlled warming permit had not proved oil trenches, arson, or ministerial guilt. It had only shown that a heat trial had been approved from reduced safety language, placed along a boundary that did not follow drainage slope, and tested with black film where water should have cooled clean mud. At the bottom of the permit, the surveyor found the required post-trial destination, ash-warmed soil to be transferred toward noble seed preparation pits after stabilization. Mabel looked toward the distant ridge fields where farmers had already lost half their claims to quiet holding. The next record would have to show where the warmed soil went and whose new fields were waiting for it. The warmed soil transfer record did not prove Odessa Crane had ordered fire beneath the ridge. It only showed the heat trial had sent prepared earth toward fields whose names were still protected from view. The transfer sheet was tied with plain cord, as if plainness could make it harmless. Mabel had learned to distrust harmless paper. Harmful orders rarely needed blood on them. They needed carts, receipts, holding yards, and a clerk who could make heat sound like preparation. Rennick Dorr stood over the causeway table, while the open trench steamed behind him in thin, dirty breaths. He did not look at Mabel when the first black film spread across the bowl of gatewater. He looked at the route marks. "Read the transfer destination," he said. The surveyor unfolded the sheet. Ash. Warmed soil from ridge drainage trial to be delivered in 3 cartloads. Destination. Lease preparation yard. 3. Use. Noble seed preparation pits, pending stabilization. Beneficiary withheld under pre-grant quiet rule. Odessa Crane answered before anyone asked. Seed preparation pits are common when damp land must be conditioned before planting. Warmed soil does not mean fire was hidden. "No," Mabel said, "but it means heat was moved." Rennick's gaze cut toward her. She corrected herself before he could. "Heat bearing soil was moved." The surveyor wrote it that way. "Who authorized the transfer?" Rennick asked. "Drainage contractor Dane Rusk, signed field completion. Lease stabilization desk accepted receipt. District Land Office marked transfer complete. Ministerial Office received notice. Receipt, not command," Odessa said. Mabel kept her eyes on the route. "Receipt, not nothing." Rennick did not endorse the sentence. He did not strike it either. Enter it as witness observation. That small permission did not warm her. It only kept her from being erased while standing in full view. The cart road to Lease Preparation Yard 3 ran east of the halted burn, skirting the reed beds and bending toward the low rise below the lease boundary. Marsh workers followed at a distance under guard. Nobles stayed on the causeway, unwilling to put boots where profit still smelled like mud. At the yard, 6 long pits had been dug into the prepared ground and covered with reed mats. That detail made Mabel's throat tighten. Reed mats belonged on marsh cuts, wet and clean. Here they had been laid over warm soil as if the marsh had been forced to hide what had been taken from it. Rennick ordered one pit opened. Odessa stepped forward. "Your Majesty, opening seed pits before allotment risks contamination of royal grant property." "Then, royal grant property can endure air," he said. The first mat was pulled aside. Steam lifted. Not a blast. Not proof of arson. A steady warmth. Wrong for ground that should have cooled through the night. The surveyor lowered a bronze probe. The wax softened at the edge. Mabel did not speak until he had written it. "Compare moisture." A marsh clerk brought the ash-root moisture sticks from the reed ledger. The soil in the pit measured drier than the ridge trench and drier than the western reach beyond the outer burn. "That should not be," the surveyor said. "Not if the pit was only receiving conditioned soil," Mabel said. "Warm soil loses water. Soil carrying black film can carry heat longer." Odessa's reply was precise. "That remains hypothesis." "Yes." The answer surprised several courtiers. Mabel let them be surprised. She was not here to win by sounding certain. She was here because the mud kept matching what the packets had made small. Rennick pointed to the other pits. "Open one more. Not all. A narrow order again. Enough to test. Not enough to accuse." The second pit held the same warmth, lower in the soil and closer to the eastern road. The third was left sealed under order. The surveyor marked the pattern: Pit 1, edge heat. Pit 2, deeper heat. Direction: eastward. "Toward the lease fields?" Rennick asked. "Toward the unassigned preparation ground," the surveyor answered. "Unassigned." Mabel looked beyond the yard. Past the low rise stood the old farmer strips, half abandoned after years of buyout pressure and drainage delays. Some families still lived there, stubborn as marsh grass. They had sold nothing, because they had nothing left worth stealing, except refusal. A boy from the worker line whispered. "Lower Ridge is that way." Mabel did not need him to say it. She had walked those roads with Callum before the harvest fire, before blame turned their name into a caution. The wind shifted. Every ash reed along the protected western reach leaned by a small degree. Not all at once. Not like worship. Not like warning bells in a children's tale. The nearest strip turned first, then the next, the movement traveling through the reed bed in a slow, countable answer. The surveyor stared. Heat bend response east by sequence. "Right sequence," Mabel said. Rennick looked toward the villages beyond the low rise. "How long?" She knew what he asked, not whether she was right. How long before hidden heat became visible enough for officials to believe it? If the pits continue drying and the wind holds, surface smoke before nightfall. Flame after that depends on what lies beneath the road. Odessa's face remained controlled. "Speculation. Technical forecast," Mabel said. Rennick did not choose either word. "Enter forecast under witness." Then a dragon shadow passed overhead. This time the patrol dragon did not merely tilt away from the east ridge. It beat its wings hard, climbed above the north route, and released a harsh, broken cry that made every horse on the road rear. Rennick looked up once, then back to the yard. Ash drift. The surveyor's assistant raised a white cloth on a rod. Grey dust streaked across it from below the ridge, not from the halted marsh burn. Mabel felt the old fear settle into place. The villagers had time, but not much. Fire moving under soil did not negotiate with land codes. "Open the floodgate readiness locks," she said. Odessa turned sharply. "Absolutely not. Floodgate readiness will panic farmers and damage Grant confidence. Grant confidence will not carry children out of Lower Ridge." Rennick's voice came cold. "Mistress Quill." She looked at him and saw the king again, not the man watching records fail, but the authority that could still make caution wait for permission. "I am not asking to flood," she said. "I am asking to make the gates ready before the road heats through." Odessa held his gaze. "That is effectively marsh authority." "No," Rennick said after a long moment. "It is emergency preparation. Locks opened under royal guard. Gates remain closed until ordered." Mabel swallowed the bitter half of it. Ready was not rescue. Permission still stood between water and fire. The warmed soil route had not named a beneficiary. It had not proved Odessa's hand. It had only shown heat-bearing earth, sealed seed pits, eastward drying, ash drift below the dragon root, and a village road lying in the direction the reeds had begun to count. At the far end of lease preparation yard 3, a farmer came running from Lower Ridge with soot on his sleeves and no flame behind him. "Smoke from the ground," he gasped. "Not the fields. Under the road." Mabel turned toward the floodgates before Renwick gave the order. The warmed soil transfer record did not prove Odessa Crane had ordered fire beneath the ridge. It only showed the heat trial had sent prepared earth toward fields whose names were still protected from view. The transfer sheet was tied with plain cord, as if plainness could make it harmless. Mabel had learned to distrust harmless paper. Harmful orders rarely needed blood on them. They needed carts, receipts, holding yards, and a clerk who could make heat sound like preparation. Rennick Dorr stood over the causeway table while the opened trench steamed behind him in thin, dirty breaths. He did not look at Mabel when the first black film spread across the bowl of gatewater. He looked at the route marks. "Read the transfer destination," he said. The surveyor unfolded the sheet. "Ash-warmed soil from ridge drainage trial to be delivered in 3 cartloads. Destination, lease preparation yard 3. Use, noble seed preparation pits. Pending stabilization. Beneficiary withheld under pre-grant quiet rule." Odessa Crane answered before anyone asked. "Seed preparation pits are common when damp land must be conditioned before planting. Warmed soil does not mean fire was hidden." "No," Mabel said, "but it means heat was moved." Rennick's gaze cut toward her. She corrected herself before he could. "Heat-bearing soil was moved. The surveyor wrote it that way." "Who authorized the transfer?" Rennick asked. "Drainage contractor Dane Rusk. Signed field completion. Lease stabilization desk. Accepted receipt. District Land Office marked transfer complete. Ministerial Office received notice. Receipt, not command," Odessa said. Mabel kept her eyes on the route. "Receipt, not nothing." Rennick did not endorse the sentence. He did not strike it either. "Enter it as witness observation." That small permission did not warm her. It only kept her from being erased while standing in full view. The cart road to lease preparation yard 3 ran east of the halted burn, skirting the reed beds and bending toward the low-rise below the lease boundary. Marsh workers followed at a distance under guard. Nobles stayed on the causeway, unwilling to put boots where profit still smelled like mud. At the yard, 6 long pits had been dug into the prepared ground and covered with reed mats. That detail made Mabel's throat tighten. Reed mats belonged on marsh cuts, wet and clean. Here they had been laid over warm soil, as if the marsh had been forced to hide what had been taken from it. Rennick ordered 1 pit opened. Odessa stepped forward. "Your Majesty, opening seed pits before allotment risks contamination of Royal Grant property. Then Royal Grant property can endure air," he said. The first mat was pulled aside. Steam lifted. Not a blast. Not proof of arson. A steady warmth, wrong for ground that should have cooled through the night. The surveyor lowered a bronze probe. The wax softened at the edge. Mabel did not speak until he had written it. Compare moisture. A marsh clerk brought the ash-root moisture sticks from the reed ledger. The soil in the pit measured drier than the ridge trench and drier than the western reach beyond the outer burn. That should not be, the surveyor said. Not if the pit was only receiving conditioned soil, Mabel said. Warm soil loses water. Soil carrying black film can carry heat longer. Odessa's reply was precise. That remains hypothesis. Yes, the answer surprised several courtiers. Mabel let them be surprised. She was not here to win by sounding certain. She was here because the mud kept matching what the packets had made small. Rennick pointed to the other pits. Open one more, not all. A narrow order again. Enough to test, not enough to accuse. The second pit held the same warmth, lower in the soil and closer to the eastern road. The third was left sealed under order. The surveyor marked the pattern. Pit 1, edge heat. Pit 2, deeper heat. Direction, eastward, toward the lease fields. Rennick asked. Toward the unassigned preparation ground, the surveyor answered. Unassigned. Mabel looked beyond the yard. Past the low-rise stood the old farmer strips, half abandoned after years of buyout pressure and drainage delays. Some families still lived there, stubborn as marsh grass. They had sold nothing, because they had nothing left worth stealing, except refusal. A boy from the worker line whispered, Lower Ridge is that way. Mabel did not need him to say it. She had walked those roads with Callum before the harvest fire, before blame turned their name into a caution. The wind shifted. Every ash reed along the protected western reach leaned by a small degree. Not all at once. Not like worship. Not like warning bells in a children's tale. The nearest strip turned first, then the next, the movement traveling through the reed bed in a slow, countable answer. The surveyor stared. Heat bend response east by sequence. Right sequence, Mabel said. Rennick looked toward the villages beyond the low rise. How long? She knew what he asked, not whether she was right. How long before hidden heat became visible enough for officials to believe it? If the pits continue drying and the wind holds, surface smoke before nightfall. Flame after that depends on what lies beneath the road. Odessa's face remained controlled. Speculation. Technical forecast, Mabel said. Rennick did not choose either word. Enter forecast under witness. Then a dragon shadow passed overhead. This time the patrol dragon did not merely tilt away from the east ridge. It beat its wings hard, climbed above the north route, and released a harsh, broken cry that made every horse on the road rear. Rennick looked up once, then back to the yard. Ash drift? The surveyor's assistant raised a white cloth on a rod. Grey dust streaked across it from below the ridge, not from the halted marsh burn. Mabel felt the old fear settle into place. The villages had time, but not much. Fire moving under soil did not negotiate with land codes. Open the floodgate, readiness locks, she said. Odessa turned sharply. Absolutely not. Floodgate readiness will panic farmers and damage Grant confidence. Grant confidence will not carry children out of Lower Ridge. Rennick's voice came cold. Mistress Quill. She looked at him and saw the king again. Not the man watching records fail, but the authority that could still make caution wait for permission. I'm not asking to flood, she said. I am asking to make the gates ready before the road heats through. Odessa held his gaze. That is effectively marsh authority. No, Renwick said after a long moment. It is emergency preparation. Locks opened under royal guard. Gates remain closed until ordered. Mabel swallowed the bitter half of it. Ready was not rescue. Permission still stood between water and fire. The warmed soil route had not named a beneficiary. It had not proved Odessa's hand. It had only shown heat-bearing earth, sealed seed pits. At the far end of lease preparation yard 3, a farmer came running from Lower Ridge with soot on his sleeves and no flame behind him. Smoke from the ground, he gasped. Not the fields. Under the road. Mabel turned toward the floodgates before Rennick gave the order. The smoke under Lower Ridge Road did not prove the warmed soil pits were built to carry fire. It only proved the villagers could no longer wait for the court to finish naming the danger. Mabel was already moving when Rennick Daw called her name. Not softly, not with trust, with the hard command of a king who had not yet decided whether the woman running toward his floodgates was witness, criminal, or the only person in Ember Marsh who understood the road beneath their feet. Mabel Quill. She did not stop. Behind her, the farmer from Lower Ridge bent double, coughing mud smoke into his sleeve. "It came through the cart ruts," he gasped. White smoke first, then black at the edges. No flame. The children were on the road. No flame. The court had waited for flame before water became evidence. Mabel would not wait for children to become proof. The floodgate wheel stood in its iron frame beside old Channel 3. The same road of water Callum had held open 6 years before the court made his name mean ruin. The readiness locks had been opened under royal guard, but the gates themselves remained closed because Rennick had not ordered release. Mabel put both hands on the wheel. A guard seized her wrist. "No flood command. Lower Ridge Road has ground smoke. His Majesty has not ordered release. Then stand aside and explain the order to the dead." The guard tightened his grip. Rennick arrived with Odessa, the surveyor, and half the court strung behind him like frightened banners. His black armor caught the reed smoke, making him look carved from burnt iron. "You will not open a royal floodgate without command." Mabel looked at him over the guard's hand. "Your command is late." The words struck the causeway harder than any accusation she had spoken. Odessa's voice cut in, controlled and urgent. "Opening Channel 3 will flood the lease preparation yard, the lower allotment line, and part of the recovered barley tract. It may destroy the very ground under review." "Yes," Mabel said. "That is what flood breaks do when fire chooses Prophet's road." Rennick's eyes darkened. "Technical witness does not carry flood authority." "No, fire does." For one breath, no one moved. The ash reeds nearest the channel bent in a narrow sequence toward the east road. Not wild, not magical, only counting heat faster than the court could name it. The farmer lifted his soot-marked sleeve. "Your Majesty, smoke is under the bridge stones." That changed the air. Rennick turned to the surveyor. "If Channel 3 opens?" The man swallowed. "Water will run through the old flood road, cross the recovered barley tract, strike the lease yard, and may reach Lower Ridge Road before surface flame. It will damage Grant land. If it stays closed," Mabel answered. "Heat follows the dry trench until the road opens from beneath." Odessa stepped closer. "There may be time for a narrower cut." "There is no narrower water road to Lower Ridge," Mabel said. "That was why Callum held this one." Renwick looked at the wheel. Mabel saw the calculation in him. Dragon grain, noble promises, land grants, the recovered tract, the old judgment, the woman he had not restored asking him to drown royal value on her word. Then black smoke curled from a crack beyond the eastern bridge. Renwick's face changed, not into tenderness, into decision. "Open Channel 3, he said. Mabel did not wait for a second command. She turned the wheel with both hands. Iron screamed. The gate shuddered, stuck in its old teeth. A marsh worker leapt beside her. Then another. The wheel moved, one spoke, then stopped. Rennick stepped in. For a moment, Mabel almost told him not to touch it. This gate belonged to those who had been blamed for knowing it. But the road was smoking, and pride could burn as surely as barley. Lower spoke, she said. "Push when I pull." The Dragon King obeyed. Together, they forced the wheel through rust and old mud. Water struck the gate from behind with a deep animal sound. The first release burst through Channel 3, brown and cold, carrying reed husks, silt, and the smell of a marsh allowed to defend itself. It ran where the cracked overlay had said it would run. Across the recovered barley tract, through the edge of Lease Preparation Yard 3, under the seed pits, toward Lower Ridge Road. Nobles shouted as the prepared ground disappeared beneath water. Odessa did not shout. She watched the flood take the pits with a face so still it gave away nothing useful. The first pit collapsed inward. Warm soil broke apart under the rush. A black film spread across the water, thicker than peat seep should have been, then pulled into a narrow line as current found the trench guide beneath it. "Mark direction," Mabel called. The surveyor stumbled forward with his slate. Black film moving east, south along buried trench line. "Not source," she said. "Direction." He wrote direction. Water hit the bridgestones at Lower Ridge before flames surfaced. Steam rose in a long white sheet. Children cried from the far bank, where villagers dragged carts uphill. The road did not ignite. Mabel held the wheel until her palms tore. Rennick stood beside her, soaked to the thigh, watching his own approved land grant disappear beneath the flood. The court watched him watch it. That mattered. A king could not later pretend the cost had been hidden from him. Odessa spoke at last. "Emergency release should be entered as unauthorized action begun by Mistress Quill and completed by royal command." "Entered," Rennick said. The word did not save Mabel. It preserved the shape of what had happened. She had moved first. He had commanded after. Mabel accepted it. Saving the village did not erase disobedience. The flood had not cleared Callum. It had not proved Odessa's motive. It had not named a beneficiary. It had only shown that the old channel still protected Lower Ridge, that the heat path ran through prepared lease ground, and that black film followed a buried trench where no ordinary seed pit should have carried it. When the water dropped enough to expose the collapsed first pit, a marsh worker found a clay trench marker lodged beneath the broken mat. The surveyor washed it in floodwater and read the stamped line. "Drainage trench continuation authorized beyond mapped works plan." Rennick took the marker in his mud-dark hand. The next record would have to explain who authorized a trench beyond the plan the Crown had been allowed to see. The clay trench marker did not prove Odessa Crane had ordered a fire road beneath Ember Marsh. It proved a trench existed beyond the works plan Rennick Dore had been allowed to see. Floodwater still moved through Channel 3, carrying reed husks, broken seed mats, and the thin black film that had followed the buried line east-south under Lower Ridge Road. The villages had not burned. That fact stood on the far bank in wet children, mud-covered farmers, and old women clutching bundles. It was not enough. Survival could be thanked and then filed in the wrong office. Mabel knew that too well. Rennick held the clay marker while water dripped from his gauntlet. His armor was soaked to the thigh. He looked less like a court portrait than a king holding unauthorized trench work like a charge he did not yet have the right to make. "Mapped works plan," he said. Odessa's face remained pale and composed. "Your Majesty, the authorized works plan has already been opened." "Then open the continuation record. The marker may have been misplaced from a later proposal." Mabel did not speak. She watched the surveyor instead. Evidence survived longer when it did not have to fight two battles at once. The surveyor turned the clay marker over. Continuation mark bears Ridge Drainage Works stamp. Series C, not a proposal tag. Field placement tag. Rennick looked at Odessa. "Open the Series C record." A ministry clerk hesitated too long. The pause was not guilt. It was only the first, honest sound the paperwork had made. Odessa turned to the clerk. "Bring any supplemental Ridge Drainage Works records tied to Lease Preparation Yard 3. The supplemental folder came bound in grey cord. Its cover read, "Stabilization. Extension. East. South Trench Continuation. Conditional." "Conditional on what?" Rennick asked. The surveyor read, "Successful warming trial. No confirmed fire activity. Beneficiary approval pending grant, and no village evacuation order active." Mabel felt the words line up like stones across a grave. No confirmed fire activity. Again. The language that waited for flame before seeing danger had been used beneath a road where children walked. Route, Rennick said. Initial request by Dane Rusk, drainage contractor. Technical acceptance by lease stabilization desk. Boundary compatibility checked against Pellan Orst's dry acre valuation. Ridge clearance, reference to Havron review. District water note cited as seasonal loss. Ministerial office acknowledged receipt for grant preparation. Ministerial receipt, Odessa said, not personal authorization. Who approved field placement? Rennick asked. Lease stabilization desk approval mark. Clerk name, Sarel Vint. Oversight line, under ministerial holding. A clerk name was smaller than a minister's. Smaller names often carried larger consequences. Beneficiary approval pending grant, Rennick said. If beneficiary is sealed, who approved? The surveyor found the rule citation. Pre-grant quiet rule permits a designated proxy to approve conditioning works when beneficiary remains unnamed. Proxy name? The page had been scraped at one corner, not erased, only blurred. Seal impression remains, the surveyor said. Not readable in mudlight. Wash it. Odessa stepped forward. Carefully. A damaged seal can mislead. For once, Mabel agreed. The surveyor rinsed the corner with clean gatewater. The mark sharpened into a cranefoot emblem pressed inside a half circle. Not Odessa's ministerial seal. Not the royal crown. A lease proxy seal. The clerk compared it with the seal register. Crane Estate Stewardship, he said. The causeway went silent. Odessa did not move. Her stillness was not confession. It was the discipline of someone whose private world had appeared in public record. Rennick's voice lowered. Does Crane Estate Stewardship mean Minister Crane? Odessa answered before the clerk could. It is an old family stewardship used for managed properties. I do not personally sign every proxy act tied to inherited estate administration. Mabel held the gate wheel until her torn palms stung. Crane Estate did not prove Odessa had dug the trench. It proved the unnamed beneficiary veil had sheltered an interest close enough to the minister to demand the next file. Beneficiary status, Rennick said. The surveyor checked the sealed register against the proxy mark. Still formally unnamed in royal copy, proxy approval logged through Crane Estate Stewardship for conditioning works only, grant not finalized. Conditioning works, Mabel said, carried heat under the village road, entered as witness observation, Rennick said. Odessa looked at him then. Your Majesty, I request this be moved to tribunal chambers. Public causeway procedure risks turning lawful estate proxy work into spectacle. Mabel expected Rennick to agree. Kings preferred chambers when noble names began to stain. He looked at Lower Ridge, where villagers stood alive because Channel 3 had opened before fire surfaced. No, he said. The works plan was public enough to burn reeds and flood farms. It will be public enough to read. Something moved through the farmers then. Not cheering, not trust. Only the first loosened breath of people kept outside the rooms that took land. The full Series C sketch was unfolded. It showed the trench line running east-south from Lease Preparation Yard 3, under the low road, and toward the higher ground below the ministerial lease boundary. Small marks dotted the trench side. Heat stones? Rennick asked. The surveyor shook his head. Storage cuts. For water? Mabel leaned closer. No, too narrow, too sealed. The black film in the floodwater pulled around her boots in thin, shining threads. She had seen peat seep. This behaved heavier, clinging to current then gathering along the trench edge. Sample the cuts, she said. Rennick nodded. The first storage cut held black residue. The second held more. The third, opened near the low road, released a smell so sharp several horses shied. Oil, the surveyor whispered. Do not whisper it, Rennick said. The man swallowed. Oil residue present in trench storage cuts. Source not yet determined. Source not yet determined. The words were hard and correct. Mabel clung to them because rage wanted something easier. The clay marker had not proved Odessa's whole design. It had not finalized the grant. It had not restored the farmers or cleared Callum. It had only shown that the hidden continuation line, proxy seal, reduced water note, warming trial, and oil residue belonged in the same public record. At the end of the Series C sketch, beneath the last storage cut, one note had been written in a smaller hand: controlled burns to encourage remaining smallholders toward voluntary sale after drainage confidence improves. Rennick read the line once, then again. The next record would not ask whether fire had been hidden under land. It would ask who had used fear of fire to make farmers leave it. The controlled burn note did not need Odessa Crane to confess. It only needed the court to read how fear of fire had been made useful before flame reached the surface. Rennick Dorr ordered the farmer sale records opened on the causeway, not in a tribunal chamber. Lower Ridge stood alive beyond the floodwater. Lease Preparation Yard 3 lay drowned behind him. The ash reeds, blackened at the outer strip and silver beyond it, leaned only where heat still moved under the ground. Mabel Quill remained 3 paces behind the surveyor. Not restored. Not yet. The first record belonged to Harlan Pike, who sold 2 low fields after 3 controlled smoke events made his children sleep in the church loft. The second belonged to Sarah Vale, who refused twice, then sold after the road behind her house cracked warm during drought. The third belonged to a family standing on the far bank, watching lost ground disappear beneath the flood that had saved them. The surveyor read each sale. Buyer, Royal Stabilization Holding, final grant beneficiary pending. Smoke events, Rennick said. Were they entered as fire events? No, Your Majesty. Entered as nuisance smoke, likely marsh gas. No surface flame confirmed. Mabel's hands closed around the reed ledger. Surface flame comes last. The same sentence had traveled from gatewater to trench permits to farmer fear, dressing danger as delay until those nearest it could no longer afford to stay. Controlled burn authorization, Rennick said. The surveyor opened the file. Small test burns permitted along drainage confidence zone. Purpose: dry brush, discourage rot, prepare soil. Safety reference: no active fire, risk in ridge review. Water note: ordinary seasonal loss. Works reference: Series C trench continuation. Who approved them? Lease stabilization desk. Proxy consent from Crane Estate Stewardship. Ministerial office receipt. Odessa stood beside her decree, composed. The estate stewardship had authority over inherited lease interests. I did not personally order farmers harmed. No one has asked whether you personally carried a torch, Mabel said. Rennick looked at her, and this time did not warn her silent. She continued carefully. The record asks why your ministry accepted reduced water notes, dry acre boundaries, sealed beneficiaries, warming permits, trench continuations, oil storage cuts, and controlled smoke near smallholders without once sending the full gatewater log to the Crown. Odessa's jaw tightened. Because each office acted within its rule. A rule can be obeyed until it becomes a road. Rennick lifted the clay trench marker. And this road carried oil. The oil sample report was read aloud. Residue from 3 storage cuts. Black film matching the floodwater trail. Heat stone fracture consistent with buried warming along a sealed trench. Source not fully determined, but trench line beyond the Crown visible plan confirmed. Rennick ordered the village survival rolls placed beside Callum's gatehouse logs. Route relevance only, he said. The surveyor read the old night again. West Floodgate opened. Manual pressure held. Old Channel 3 released. Villages east of Lower Ridge remained dry. Underground heat suspected at Barley Route Line. If closed, heat runs under Ridge Road. Open until village side cools. Then the survival rolls. Lower Ridge, Fenmere, Ashlow. No burn deaths. No structure loss. Smoke passed under road after flood release. Relief thanks filed, not attached to land valuation. not attached to judgment review. Rennick stood very still. When he spoke, his voice carried across farmers, marsh workers, dragon riders, nobles, clerks, and the woman whose husband had died holding a wheel the crown had called reckless. Callum Quill's record is corrected provisionally under royal witness. The prior classification of reckless flooding is struck pending formal tribunal. New entry: emergency firebreak release duty, supported by gatehouse logs, flood channel route, heat path survey, and village survival roles. Mabel did not cry. Tears would come later, when no court could use them. Rennick turned to the surveyor. The western reach of Ember Marsh is removed from reclamation grant review. Ember Marsh becomes protected communal firebreak land under Crown Charter, held for villages, marsh workers, and dragon flight defense. Displaced farmers whose sales followed controlled smoke events regain first claim to their property or full restitution from seized grant funds. A sound moved through Lower Ridge. Not cheers at first, but disbelief cracking open. Odessa said, "Your Majesty, seizure before tribunal. Suspension before tribunal." Rennick cut in. Land Minister Odessa Crane is suspended from all reclamation, lease stabilization, and grant authority. Crane Estate stewardship records are sealed. Ridge drainage works is seized for investigation. No burn order, drainage cut, warming trial, or land sale tied to Ember Marsh may proceed without public firebreak review. He faced Mabel in front of everyone. "I approved burning fire defense before reading the heat. Bend counts, gatewater marks, ash drift records, and flood channel logs tied to it." The words did not mend the reeds. They did not return Callum. They did not erase the years Mabel had been treated as grief with a ledger. But they entered the public record. That was where repair had to begin. "Your firebreak authority is restored," Rennick said, "not as courtesy, as law. The ash reeds are recognized as fire defense infrastructure. No reed bed may be cut, burned, drained, or relabeled obstruction without your office's full readings attached." For the first time that day, Mabel stepped to the table without being called behind the surveyor. She laid her torn palms on the reed ledger. "Then enter one more order." Rennick waited. "Channel 3 stays open until Lower Ridge cools below root heat. The noble seed pits remain drowned. The reeds are replanted before grain is discussed." Entered. At dusk, Rennick stood beside Mabel at the floodgate. He did not reach for her torn hands. He did not ask forgiveness while the marsh still smoked. "I will help rebuild the outer strip," he said. "You will fund it," she answered. "My people will rebuild it." He accepted the correction. "Then I will stand where I am useful and silent where I am not." Across Ember Marsh, the surviving ash reeds bent in narrow, countable strips as the last underground heat cooled under floodwater. Not toward guilt, not toward love, only toward what still needed measuring. Mabel watched the silver stems steady in the ash wind. Beside her, the Dragon King stayed one respectful step away, no longer asking the marsh to prove itself after it had already saved his kingdom.